I think we are live. Welcome back. So for me, it's basically the first live stream I did or I'm doing after my summer break. I did one conference talk, but this was live too, but it's different format. So this is like the first time doing this on my own again with all the fun and also like the scary feeling when you start to go live. But have chosen a nice topic, a good one, because I like to do things that I do a lot because it's a lot easier to do them live because, you know what to do. But I will also do in the next week some things which are not so comfortable, which I maybe haven't done yet before, and I have to figure out live how to do this. I mean, the actual real fun. So today we do product events for task management. Before we do this, I quickly can show. So I don't know if I want to do this every time, but this is what I will do on the weekend. So book information dashboard design by Stephen Few, one of my favorite ones. I'm not someone who likes to do a lot of dashboard design and dashboard things. I don't know. It's not really my area. So, but everyone who likes to do this, and so for me, this is like just showing you back. I think you can still order it. So this is really like the kind of, let's say, dashboard design that I like. So it's really like focusing on how to decide which kind of information you really want to show in a really very minimalistic way. And I have to work on some visualization next week, and so I have to get prepared. Will I do a live session about it? I don't know. Oh, thanks, Max. Excellent. So Maximilian already put the Amazon link here, and of course you can also order it at any other bookshop you like. Go to your local bookshop, but you also get it from Amazon pretty quickly, I guess. So so that's as a starter, but now we start with the real stuff. Just let me switch. Quick second. So here we go. Today we do again Miro, and what you see here is something new I'm just working on. I just wanted to show you this as a starter because I just did this in the morning, and so I'm working on some people might have seen this already. So I'm working on a video platform where I want to do a lot of data practice videos, so really like hands-on session like the one we are doing right now for a specific kind of topic. So of course, like in my case, a lot about data collection and how to approach this whole thing, but I will also work with other people who are expert in other areas, and then where we do really like hands-on looking over the shoulder sessions. And I did a recording today in the morning where I was like data collection 101. And so if you want to see the full data collection 101, of course, like you have to subscribe. I might put the comment after the session or like the link where you can sign up in the comments. So there's no video yet, so you just sign up, and then I think in 6-8 weeks we should be ready to open up the doors, and then then you can but this is important for what we do today. So, because like as a reminder, so I like to separate or like create a hierarchy in the kind of events that I use between business, product, and interaction events. And so the reason for that is like that business activities and events, as you can see here, they are usually really like very connected to the kind of business you are in and how you work in the different kind of teams within your company. And the things that you define here usually is really easy to understand, and everyone in your company. And the good thing about these kind of events is like also they change very much. But we don't talk about them today, so I did another session about this, and I will do other sessions in the future about these things as well. So today we talk about product. And I mean, I'm still not super happy with this kind of term of product, so I might change this in the future. But right now it's like it's describing the area where I work the best. So usually like everyone who's looking into data has some kind of digital product. So it can be a website, an app. It can also be like some kind of other different digital service, which, I don't know, just works via email or with some kind of chatbots or whatever. So, but it's some kind of digital product. And this product is usually something that you have some kind of users or customers who use this kind of product. And so they work with specific kind of features that you're offering. And so for you in your product department, but also like in other departments like growth, but sometimes also like in sales, and maybe sometimes even like in revenue operations, it's important for you to understand how people basically interact with your product, because you need to derive some strategies from that to make, for example, activation better, or in the end, you get more people coming back to your product, so improve retention. But for that, you have to understand how people actually work with these things that you put on their desk, and you don't really know what they do with that. And so this is why it's important to track these kind of things. And the old approach for that was often like this. I always call it like a little bit the segment approach, because Segment wrote a very famous article about it. So to really go through and see where people are interact with things. So you open up your product, your application, and then you go there. Okay, yeah, there someone can click, and here someone can do something, and that's okay. I think for a first version, definitely not bad. But the problem with that is like you end up with a lot of events in the end if you go this way. And so this, for example, is like why I have introduced this third interaction category, where you really go into the different kind of interactions. But I see product as a level above that, and so that you make sure that you really cluster your events that you want to track around the different kind of, let's say, product features or product entities you have in your product. And so if you go on this level higher, this is the exercise we do today, then you will see you won't have so many entities there. And you will see you don't need so many different kind of, let's say, activity or events to track all these things. And so you make sure that you have a very solid product event setup that also can stay for some kind of time, because like small interaction events, so if someone clicks in a specific thing, filter in a, let's say, a navigation, these can change over time more often, more quickly, because this is the stuff that usually your product team is working on every time. More generic product features in comparison is something that stays longer. So you might have product features that are around for all the time, all the lifetime of a product. You might have some features that are introduced and then at some point they disappear because they don't really create any kind of value. So this is okay as well, but it's like on a longer time stamp. So this also means like when you implement these kind of things, you implement them at least for some kind of time. So I mean, development resources are expensive, and you don't want to waste them on implementing tracking events that no one looks at and are not really relevant after 2 weeks. So this is why we try to find a better ground to make things more solid. So enough talking, enough theory. So let's dive into it. And so let's get me my usual post-its I use. So this is usually the ones where I define the entities. Then I need one where I have the activities, or aka actions. And then I need some for the start for the properties. And what we are doing today is like, I always like to pick an example that most of the people at least have an idea. And so today we are looking into, let's see that I can switch here. So we are looking today into Asana. So we take Asana as an example, but in the end, I mean, everyone of you has worked with some kind of task management. So you can also see this as a generic task management example. But I just pick Asana because I'm using this at the moment, for example, to plan all my content. So what you can see here is my content video pipeline. So you can already get a sneak peek what is coming in the next weeks, by the way, which is okay. But this can also be for Jira. This can also be for ClickUp, and I mean whatever is around. Because like this is also nice about if you go on a high abstraction level for product events, it becomes basically, let's say, you will have 70%, which is the same across all this category of different kind of events. So this is nice too. So let's go back to Miro and let's start to design. So how do I approach this? So I'm trying to get an idea what are the essential objects that creates this product. And so in the task management, let's put this maybe on top. So task management, so that we know what we're talking about. There we go. So in a task management, I usually like to start to sketch out some entities. So obvious, task management has a task, not a big surprise. Often task management also have a list or a project. So some kind of container where let's say the task is placed. So now you could think about, okay, how do you name it? So of course, like you could name it project. I think this is like the Asana. I always forget like the hierarchy. I think Asana is the next one, is project. We could also take a even more abstract approach, and we could just maybe call it container. So this could include like projects, folders, teams. So often, at least like the more advanced task management tools have different levels how you can put the task in it. And now it's the question, okay, does it make sense to define every like level where you put things separately, or just have, let's say, a generic one called container? Even when I'm a fan of making things very generic and agnostic, I would say I would not name it here container, because the problem is like you introduce an artificial term here, which container, which of course you can explain to everyone. You can say, yeah, actually a container can be a project or it can be a team. But it's definitely disconnected from the items that your company or your product team is working with on the day. So I try to have at least like product, like the events as close as possible to the things that we work with. And so I won't do it in that way. So for me, it's fine when we have basically two entities for all these things. So there are projects and there are teams. Also because like, I don't know, I think it's not that way in Asana, but for example, it could be like that you have a specific subscription plan that just allows a specific number of teams. So then having teams as a known entity definitely makes more sense because it has some kind of business relevance for you. So we keep it with teams. So another thing that we saw was like what they introduced. They have different kind of views where I can watch my tasks, and views are often connected to projects. So let me place it here as well. So here again, the question, okay, do I really need the view as an own entity, or could be like a view just, for example, an activity within a project? So when we quickly go back to Asana again, so these, for example, here at the top, oh no, you don't see it because I don't show it where it is. So these at the top, for example, are different kind of views. And they are a very important feature. So, I mean, as you can see, you have really like different kind of views. And I think it was not something that was there in the beginning, but it was something they introduced at some point to really make it simple for you to, so I don't work with date, this is why it's not really working, but I mean, it makes sense. So that you can switch between these things. And you can also set something as a default. So it's an important feature. And so this is why I think it's important that we also point it out. So let me go back. So this is why I have the views here. And then, of course, I have the teams. So this already looks good. This, I think, catches, let's say, the 80% what makes Asana. Then there, of course, are other areas that are very, let's say, more specific, potentially to Asana. One thing that we should definitely put in here might be, for example, an account. An account often is, for me, in my case, is often also a business event. So then I have to make a decision if I just leave them out here on product level or not. It depends a little bit on how the activities are differ. So sometimes I track these on a business level, more generic, and then it appears in both. So it appears on the business level, but also on the product level. Yeah. So then, for example, but we will not really work on this today. It's like, so for example, Asana also has goals. Yeah, like this. Okay, so we have projects and we have. I usually name my entities in singular, so not like this. But I'm not so good in being very disciplined about naming conventions. So I'm, for example, someone who always needs tools to check my naming convention because I'm super bad in and stick to the plan. So this looks good already. So it's definitely something I would start with. And so the reason why, for example, I work in Miro is like, for me, this kind of process is not something that I sit down and I sketch the perfect plan within 20 minutes. It's more like it's a starting point. So for me, it's like I can play around here, and right now I'm doing this loudly, so I can reason with myself to how I would design these things. And it's also like a good, let's say, working document later when I have the first version ready. And so this, for example, is something you can also do in a team. It's a really nice team experience, by the way. But then at some point you might also like introduce more stakeholders in this whole process. So to really see, okay, does the sales team, for example, understand this as well? And this is a good basis to really work on this, because then you can say, maybe let's refine this activity, or maybe views are not so important for us, and so we just remove them here, or so whatever. So it's a good way before I formalize a tracking plan. So formalization of a tracking plan I usually do in Avo. Some people might came across it. So this is like a tracking plan tool. There I really then put like my initial version 1 of my tracking events into this tool, and then it becomes more formalized, and then I can make sure that namespace and so on. But I like to start out here because it gives me more flexibility to test out things, if it works or not. So let's do that. So let's focus on the task. So let's move this down a little bit. So what I do in the next step is usually like to make sure that I get an idea what kind of activities are around a task. And so, I mean, of course, like a task can be created. Then a task can be, how to name it? So when I finish it, it can be finished. Let's call it like this. I mean, we could also like, I was just thinking if I maybe set it to done, or I think in Asana, for example, it's marked complete. So this is a little bit of, now we come to the tracking plan language. And so my approach is like to come as close to the language that you use internally. So finish was something that I thought about. Mark complete, for example, is something that is used within Asana. So let's assume this is kind of common language within the Asana team. So let's stick with that. So always don't try to be so artificially with this. So try to use the things that you use internally when you talk about these kind of features. So because then everyone who looks into like then the event data or into the tracking plan, they see task marked complete, they immediately have an idea what it is. All right, so then now comes an interesting thing. So we could just, for example, like we have created, then we have marked complete, and then, for example, we could just do updated and then maybe delete it. And you already see a little bit of pattern. So the ones of you who are software developers see at least the pattern. And this is, I'm just giving this in because sometimes it's hard to get an idea where you start with kind of activities. But often like product features have some kind of, let's say, a CRUD, or so create, read, update, delete. And so this is good because it reminds me there is something in between, which should be called viewed. So when you don't really have an idea what you should put in here, this is definitely a good starter to really say, okay, we have, so it's often created, then it can be read, then it can be updated, and then it can be deleted. So we could do it like this, but I also want to show you, so I guess this is a good start. So this is definitely something, if you want to implement something quickly, this might cover it okay. So you definitely have a good first level of activities. So I just want to show, if you really want to go deeper, what you could do. And always keep in mind, always with every event you introduce, of course, like you introduce some kind of complexity. You introduce complexity for developers to implement. You introduce complexity for you to document. You introduce complexity in what kind of ever analysis or discovery or dashboard tool you use, because you have more events to handle. And so this is why, of course, like make sure that you don't randomly over eventify things. But yeah, but for example, here I would say, okay, this might be a starter, but I definitely would like to go a little bit deeper. So let's move this updated there, because I'm not sure if updated really gives us enough value, because it's just generic. Okay, someone updated something. So for me, it's more important what actually happens within these updates. And so I would say, let's say assigned is something that might be interesting. Then maybe commented, added a description. And so now we already, this one is maybe a good one where we can just make a quick break. So this is very specific. But it could be like that we just introduced a description feature. So it could be like that before you could just have a task name and don't have a description. And then it can really make sense to just introduce this as a specific activity, because you really want to know how this feature is. Or it could be like that you want to analyze, because you figured out, okay, when people really put description in it, there might be a hypothesis that these people are more likely to use this kind of feature. So then, of course, like you want to spot a light on this as well. And so this makes, I think it makes sense to have it as a single event. If you are a little bit concerned that you have a lot, you still could do updated, and then you could the update type as a property. So it could be like that we say, okay, update type, or type of update, or whatever, type of update. You could do this as a property. And then you basically would then have assigned, commented, and so on. So there's no clear recipe to it. So like my only advice and kind of recipe is like, balance the number of activities that you define. So so if you would have here 15 activities, I would say it's maybe a bit too much. But if you just look on tasks and the other ones is not really so important, then maybe it's okay if you have this. So it's always like to keep the balance if the tools are still usable in this kind of way. And if you, for example, have the feeling that you have too many events, then it's pretty easy to design. Then you just basically introduce a higher abstraction level as an activity, and you put the context of it in it. So if we would be crazy, we would just say we just have one activity, and then we put here type of activity as a property, and then this is there. So yeah, but I think you get an idea that you want to have like the activity a little bit more speaking, because like you want to have, let's assume it like this. These activities are then basically quick access to a specific kind of observation that you want to do. And so, it totally makes sense to have a lot more quick access just based on what things you're working on. So this is why we take this out. And maybe put something like shared. then always, what I can always recommend, think about, are there activities that happen not by user interaction? So sometimes it just happens because some backend job is running. And so I'm just thinking, in this case, there's not really something. Just think, I mean, of course, like you could something like an automatic archive. So like maybe you have a setting that you can say, archive unworked tasks after 90 days. So I'm just put this here. So then, for example, this could be a backend job that just runs every night and just archives all tasks that haven't been changed or worked on for 90 days. And so it doesn't really rely on user interaction, but it's important. I mean, you want to have it. If you have this kind of feature, of course, it's important for you to know what it does. And so I just let it here. I think Asana doesn't have the kind of feature. But at least I know Trello has a feature that it marks stuff as old, for example. So this could be also something like that. It gets maybe not archived, but it gets tagged automatically. Yeah, this could be maybe even a better example, so that you have always like some kind of automatic rules, and then basically tasks get tagged by, I don't know, what you write in the description or so. And this is a backend job. And so this is, but just a reminder that not all the things always happen where users are interacting. So you have plenty of things that happen somewhere else. So this might be a good start. I mean, we might have more. So I think it can also be liked and so on, or can be favorite. Then you can just extend it. So it's also like, the good thing is like often like when you introduce new features, no, not features. Let's say favorite or bookmarked. So if you introduce new features, so for example, you have a bookmark feature now. So the interesting thing is often like this never really changed unless you get rid of tasks for some reasons. So you don't want to be a task management anymore. So you remove this. But if you introduce a new feature, it usually either introduce a new activity. Sometimes if the feature is just on a specific entity, an existing activity, then, for example, you would just maybe introduce one or new properties. This is quite nice. So this stays usually the same. This often also stays the same, unless you get rid of a feature, then you remove this, or you introduce a new one, then you might introduce a new activity. I see most of the changes when I work constantly on something like this than on the property level. Because now let's go to the properties. So in properties, I give context to what's happening. And in the past, I did it often like this, that I assigned the properties to the event. So task created is the event, and then I put all the properties to this. And then I repeat 40% of the same properties here, and then 30% here, and maybe here 70% the same, and I don't know. And so it's really hard to keep track, especially when you do your tracking plans in spreadsheets, because then for example, change the name of one property, and then you have to go into all the events and have to change it there as well. And usually you forget one, at least I forget one. So, but the interesting thing is like properties are often for 80% just specific for a task. And so task shares, or let's say the activities for a task share 70% of the same properties. And so I now really just define them for an entity. And in the past, I then just define some special ones for specific activities, but I don't do this anymore as well. So I just say, okay, there might be some properties which are not relevant for viewed, which are might just relevant for created or so, but it's fine. I mean, the good thing is like if you have a central place to define the properties, you can really make sure that it's centralized and you don't really duplicate stuff or do it differently and so on. So you just have one central place where you define it, and that's, at least it helps me. So I got rid of this special thing. So I have to quickly do a drink break. I recorded already 3 hours videos today, and so this is the last one, so my voice is already a little bit suffering, but yeah. I have to talk, so let's do this a little bit. So what I always like to do, I put always like some kind of ID. So identifiers, I mean, this is a different topic, maybe also like one for a live session. Identifiers are really like bread and butter for data setups, because identifiers enable you to stitch up stuff later or to enhance stuff later. So for example, when I pull all this kind of, let's say, event data into a database, I could also pull in some production database data, so from my Asana, a production table, and could enrich things here, because maybe I forgot to set a specific kind of property and I want to make a quick analysis. So, and I have a setup where I work a lot with a data warehouse setup. And so data warehouse setup makes it easy for me to enhance things afterwards, retroactively for everything. And therefore an ID, sorry, an ID is always like a huge help to do this. And so always make sure to, where you can, send IDs. So whatever, it's like, often like every entity has some kind of ID, always send IDs. So then maybe, then of course like task status. So task status would be like if it's done or still open. Here again, I mean, status, if you present something like, sorry, if you present, for example, task status to someone else, you definitely have to explain what you mean by that. This might be okay in that case, but you could also like say task done. If it's really like just about to select if the status is really about like open and done, then you could also do this, or like the reverse thing, like task open, and then just make this as a Boolean. So that you can have yes or no. The good thing about this is like, or task complete. I mean, we are now in the Asana context, so let's call it task complete. Because this again is like this language thing. So task complete is easier to understand. So if I see this as a property, it's, yeah, I definitely know what it is. It also then connects to this activity. So we have activity mark complete, and now we have like a property task complete. So try to make these connections. So always think like from a user experience perspective. So one of the famous, let's say very popular UX books is Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. And Don't Make Me Think can definitely be a mantra for tracking plans as well. So try to name things in a way that people don't have to think what it could be. And so I know language is hard and it's not always possible, but in that case, for example, it's definitely possible. All right, what else? What I, for example, like, developers usually don't like, is something like this. Number of comments. Why do I like it? Because it gives me a way to classify. So for example, if I want to analyze, I don't know, task activity, the number of comments in a task is definitely a pointer to that, to make different kind of clusters. So like tasks without comments, tasks with, let's say, 2 to 5 comments, and more than 5 comments. And then to analyze the different kinds of performance of that. So I could, for example, go in and can say, okay, show me all the accounts that have at least 10 tasks or 20% of tasks that have more than 5 comments. And so and compare them to, let's say, lower activity accounts to see how likely they are to convert to subscription. And so it's definitely something that's really interesting. Developers don't like that because these are aggregated let's say aggregated data. So often this is not easily already there. So tracking implementation based on data that is visible on the front end is usually pretty straightforward because you already have to get the data to show it on the front end. So this is stuff which is usually easy to implement. If you have things, so it could be, for example, that they have like a number, like 3, like comments, then 3. So then it's really easy for them to just pull this number and just put it here. If they don't have it on the front end, they have to get it somewhere. And so someone has to calculate things. And so this is important to know. This is like another thing which is important in tracking implementation in general, is like, this is why I also like this wireframe approach. It's a start of a conversation. And the conversation with the developers who implement these things is super important, because it can be that the developer tells you that she has to run specific number of queries in the back end and then push this data up to the front end to get to these things. And I saw tracking implementation, which in the end was basically limiting the application speed. And this is never, so this is a no-go. So, I mean, of course, data collection is important, but data collection can never be in the way of the application itself. So always go into a discussion with the developers you work with to discuss these different kind of things. So is it easy to get? Is it maybe hard? And if it's too hard, you can then maybe say, okay, maybe we don't implement it in the first place. But if this really becomes important, because I mean, you have this task force that you want to improve activation, and everyone believes comments are the essential thing for it. I mean, then it's a reasonable effort to say, okay, we have this task force, now we want to introduce this property. And then you basically design the application around that. It makes it easy, because maybe you just cache the number of comments, because you don't really need it in real time. So it's all totally okay when you update the number of comments, I don't know, every hour or so. And then a backend job can run and can just update it, and then everything is fine. But just what is important is really like to make a open conversation out of it. So a tracking plan is an invitation to discuss it. And I know discussions can sometimes be hard, because people start to, I don't know, sometimes make things more difficult. But I can already tell you, so I work with this kind of format now for some time. And if you have this kind of structure that everyone immediately understands, you rarely have discussions that go in directions that no one wants them to go. And so it's more like that people are just starting to refine. They say, I don't understand. So for example, they say, we never delete things. So it could be like that. You always assume that they delete things, but they never do. They say, maybe can we call this differently or whatever. So then you just discuss some kind of details, which is really good, because it makes everything better. And you will discuss a lot about properties, I assume. But yeah, always discuss with developers how feasible it is to implement these kind of properties. Let's see, of course, like it could be task bookmarked to see if, for example, people work a lot of it. Now, another thing, what you can already see here, I like to prefix my properties. So here I didn't do it, so task. Here looks a little bit strange, because it's not really, let's say, typical language flow. But I still like to do it, because properties are often really, especially when you define them that, they are really often bound to this kind of entity. And so, for example, bookmarked can be something that we also have for a project. And so, of course, we could just have a generic bookmarked thing that worked well too. So because then we have bookmarked here for tasks and bookmarked here for projects. I still like to distinguish it, because it makes it easier for me to later see, okay, is this now a property which is bound to project, and is this a property which is bound to tasks? So it makes it easier to really group things where they belong, and to really don't mix up things which maybe have the same name but slightly different. In this case, it would be the same, but sometimes you have namings where it might be really slightly different, and so by that you really make sure that you have a clear identification. Maybe another as a final thing. So how do you now write these things? And so you can already see how I write these things. So if you now define an event, so if you work with, let's say, 80% of the tools, you need then to define an event name, because like they are based on event names. So if you work with Segment, Rudderstack, Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Amplitude, and so on, so they expect an event name. And so, I mean, I think this is quite obvious. So you usually create the event name then from the combination between entity and activity. So task created. And then we have the properties, and the properties are already named. So this is how I do things. There are different formats you can do. So I mean, we could also do the same thing here, what we did there, and use snake case. So then we have snake case for the event name and snake case for the property. I cannot even tell you why I do it like I do it, because it just established it over time. So I do it like this, that I write the event names in a normal headline kind of way. And I think there's also a term for it, but I forgot it. And then I write my properties as snake case. Why do I write my properties as snake case? Mostly because I develop in Python most of the time. So this kind of variable definition is quite natural to me. So someone coming from the JavaScript world would most likely have maybe done this. We could also like do this task completed as this. The only thing why I'm doing is I like to have the writing of my events and my properties in a different way, because then it's easier for me if I go over a list of different kind of things. It's easy for me to immediately recognize this is a property and this is a task. So we could also do like task created. So since in programming languages, you always have some kind, so for example, constants that you write with just capital letters. Possible as well. The only thing which is important, define something, how you name event names or how you write event names, and define something, how you write properties, and then be consistent. So what doesn't make sense, of course, I think it's obvious, that you end up with these things, so that you have this and then someone comes up with this and so on, so that you in the end really create some kind of chaos, because then this one benefit that I just described, that you can easily catch what it is, just goes away. And it also it introduces errors. So then, for example, if someone starts to do this, then maybe someone else for some reasons still starts to do this. So then you have two properties. So especially this is a usual case that happens if you have multiple front ends and have different developers working on these things. And then so like the Android developer writes it like this, and the iOS developer writes it like this. So this is no fun, because someone else in a different downstream system, so be it like an analytics tool or in your warehouse, someone has to clean this up. Because like for the systems, these are two different properties. For you, it's the same, but technically it's two different. And so you always have to merge it. I mean, some tools allow you to merge things, but make sure that these things don't happen on this kind of stage. And that's it already. So, I mean, we just did it now for the task. So usually like now the whole exercise would be like to go through all these things and define it. But it doesn't take so long. And as I said, so it's really like if you are a product team, it's a good exercise for a product team. If you are a big product team, it's good exercise for the task. I don't know, product persons which are working on tasks to do it. And then take at least 1 or 2 additional rounds where you show this to people who are not so close to this kind of topic. So if you develop this in the product team, head over to the marketing and growth team and discuss with them. So and look if they immediately, so ask them what do they understand, and for example, for what kind of activities they're not really sure what it means. And then really ask for honest feedback. So it's not about that they have to recreate something, but it's more like that you get an idea if you have found the right language that other people understand the things. Because it can happen that marketing at some point of time wants to work with some of these product-specific events as well, because like they have a specific growth optimization task, and they, for example, want to make sure that more tasks get assigned, and so they want to create some communication within the tool around that. And so then, of course, like it makes it easier for them when they can immediately see the data for it and analyze it. And so this is why I always recommend to, I mean, you don't have to do this a month like roadshow that you go through all the teams and ask them how they understand this, but do it 1 or 2 times that at least you get an idea, okay, what I just defined is not so specific that other people cannot understand it. And yeah, that's it. This is basically how I design product events. In that case, for task management. So in this specific case, how I would design it if Asana would call me and say, hey, we need a new tracking plan. This is at least where I would start. And like maybe as closing words is like, also like when this gets implemented, like let's assume this all gets implemented. This is version 1. A tracking plan can easily end up in version, I don't know, 25. I mean, it's not a good sign if a tracking plan then gets changed on these kind of levels a lot, because this would, I mean, it can happen. If you're in an early phase, you might iterate on what kind of features you have. But a tracking plan might change, for example, here, because you want to add more context to the things. And so the important part is like, don't think this is something that you put in stone for today and you cannot change it. Tracking plans change all the time. They should not change dramatically all the time, but they should be adjusted. And I can already tell you, like, the first dramatic change will happen when you start to implement this. Because then the things happen that I just said. Then someone says, this is super hard for us. We don't really catch this and so on. So then it's okay. I mean, you can still leave it in there. Maybe you mark it in a different way. So you say, okay, this is something we don't implement right now, but it's maybe something that we might do in the future. So be flexible with that. And make sure, like, it's a living document. Assign a team or a person who's basically owning this document. And you can also split across. You can say, okay, one person does tasks, the other person does projects. It's also doable as well. But make sure that there's some kind of ownership for it. But I think in a product team, it's pretty straightforward, because you always have specific people, especially when you derive it from the features, that you have specific people who work with specific features. And of course, they can then own these definition of the tracking event. All right. That was the first live session after the summer break. So the next break, I guess, will be in winter. So we will have a lot more live sessions coming up. I'm trying to do them now every 2 weeks. I hope I will keep the pace like this. Let's see. But it's definitely on my Asana goals that I do a live stream every 2 weeks. And so then you can expect one to drop in 2 weeks, because I always do them now on Friday at this kind of time, which is a good time for everyone living in a Europe time zone, not a good time for everyone not living in this time zone. But since you can always watch the recording, I think that's fine. All right, then I would say have a good day, enjoy your weekend, and see you in 2 weeks.